number 3.
This happened in October of this year. My two friends and we decided to go camping for a few days. It was around 2 p.m. when we arrived at Cannock Chase, which is a huge woodland area in the UK. The main reason we chose here is because my friend and I, Emma, we're really into listening to scary stories and creepypastas, and we heard a few stories that a black-eyed girl had been spotted here a few times, so we were very curious. However, my friend Snow hated the idea, but we still persuaded her to come. We set up camp and we mess around for a few hours, having a few drinks and telling a few scary stories. It got to be about 6 p.m. and it started to get dark, and the campfire, it started to die down. Seeing that the fire was beginning to die down, I offered to go and get some wood for the fire. I only walked about 5 minutes from the camp to look for the firewood when I had a strange feeling that someone was watching me. In the times I had listened to people's scary stories and people said that, it was like, how can you feel someone watching you? But trust me, you can. At first, I shook it off as we just told creepy stories to one another, so I thought it was just me being paranoid. But then I heard a twig snapping to the left of me. I investigated the noise with my light on my phone, but there was nothing there.
Pull yourself together, Red. You're being stupid,
I told myself. As I was a bit spooked, I grabbed a few large twigs and headed back to camp. We hung out for a few good hours until we decided to go to sleep. We had 2 tents. Emma and Snow, they shared one, and I had a one-man tent to myself. I sat in my tent, but I really couldn't sleep. Something just didn't feel right. I looked at my phone and it was 1 a.m, so I decided to try and sleep it off. I fell asleep, but before long, I woke up to a small draft coming into my tent. I slowly sat up and realized that my tent door, it was open ever so slightly.
That's weird. I'm sure I shut that,
I said to myself. I heard laughter outside, so I got out and saw Emma and Snow. I asked them,
Hey, did one of you guys open my tent?
They both replied no, and then Emma said,
Maybe it was the black-eyed girl.
They both laughed and I rolled my eyes and sat with them. Skipping ahead, we were getting a little bored of the quiet, so I decided to go and get my phone to play some music. And as I walked toward my tent, I saw something, a figure in the distance. I still don't know why I didn't run right then, but curiosity got the better of me. Could this be the black-eyed girl, I thought? So I went to grab my phone, but it was missing. I looked back up and the figure, it was gone. I walked to where the figure had been and looked behind the tree, when all of a sudden I felt a hand over my mouth and something pointy held against my back. I heard a deep voice whisper in my ear,
One move or sound and I'll kill you, and then your 2 friends over there.
I wasn't about to let this guy kidnap and rape me, or worse. So I moved my leg between his legs and flicked up as hard as I could, kicking him straight in the balls, and he let go and yelled,
Ah, you bitch!
I then started running towards my friends, but he was really quick and was almost right behind me as I shouted run. They both turned and began to run, but he was right behind me and tackled me to the floor. He leant over me and said,
Don't worry, I'll make it rough. That's how I like it anyway.
I felt my trousers begin to come off.
No, please, you don't want to do this.
I squirmed and closed my eyes as my body went limp.
Get off her, you fucker,
I heard Emma shout. I opened my eyes to see Emma with what looked like a gun. The man got up and said,
Shit, okay, I'll go, fuck,
and ran into the woods with his pants halfway down. Snow helped me up and I turned to Emma and said,
Where the fuck did you get a gun?
She smirked and then kind of laughed and said,
It's not a real gun. I always bring it to camping. It's my sister's cosplay gun.
I hugged her and thanked her. We called our parents and then the cops straight away, and while waiting for them, we looked for my phone. We found it on the floor where the man had tackled me. I surmised that because I didn't have it, he must have taken it out of the tent, and that's why the tent was open. I looked on my phone, and I saw photos of me sleeping. Unfortunately, the man was never caught, and they found no fingerprints on the phone apart from mine and a few friends. I still wonder why he took my phone first. Was it so that I couldn't call anyone if he kidnapped me? I suppose I'll never know. But this taught me to be more careful when camping, and to not go wandering off on your own at night. I hate to think what would have happened if Emma didn't bring that plastic gun.
Number 2.
My name is Oliver, and I'm 24 years old. A while back, I originally became interested in this channel due to the deep web stories, as I'd gained a major interest in it. The content I had listened to and watched on this channel, it's grown with me, as I've heard almost every story. Yet, the one story I had not heard of, it had to do with the black-eyed children. As one can imagine, it's pretty creepy and disturbing, and quite fearful to think that these type of children could exist. A little background about myself before I go into the story. I've collected some odd things from my past that I haven't let go of, including a sword known as Tenza Zangetsu from the manga or anime Bleach, and a machete that my friend had given me only 1 month prior to this whole thing occurring. The machete, it stays sheathed at all times and lays upright next to my dresser so that I can access it easily in case of an emergency. My story isn't an actual encounter. Well, at least, I'll have to keep telling myself that. It couldn't have been more than 2 weeks ago when I experienced perhaps one of the scariest moments of my life. Things were good. I had just gotten back from Las Vegas for an overdue vacation, and I needed to chill out after all the excessive drinking and gambling. As such, I decided to smoke some pot I had laying around. I don't freak out when I smoke it, or do anything out of the ordinary. I do know though that it does sometimes affect my dreams, and sometimes I have trouble sleeping. After doing the deed, I found myself ready to sleep and just doze off. Except, I found myself waking up in the middle of the night having to use the restroom. With my roommate currently out for the winter, I found myself in a completely dark house at 2 o'clock in the morning. Having memorized the layout of the small living spaces, I pay no mind to the suitcase I left near the front door, nor the fact that I can't see anything in front of me. After finishing up in the bathroom, I walk back to my room to get back to sleep, only to realize that I left the door to my room open. It's not a common occurrence, but I wasn't bothered by it too much either. That was until I started hearing the noise of someone urinating in my bathroom. Immediately now, my eyes opened up as I had just comprehended I wasn't alone in my house anymore. Grabbing my glasses off of the counter that held my speakers, I act quickly and silently go to grab my machete near my dresser. Taking the sheath off the blade, I felt more confident to handle whoever thought that they could just walk into my house and piss and do whatever else they thought that they pleased. With the layout of the house, I'm literally 3 steps away from my bathroom, and my roommate has his own in his room. I slowly make the 3 steps that I've always made towards the bathroom, except this time, with careful position of the blade to make sure whoever's there, they won't stand much of a chance. As I hit the light in the bathroom, I get ready to plunge the blade forward, only to be completely stopped. It was a mix of fear and paralysis, as no matter what I did, I couldn't move. I used all the force I had physically and mentally to move, but I'd been stuck in a position. A kid, no more than 7, had been taking a piss in my bathroom, and his eyes, they were black, completely and utterly black. Realizing the situation I was in, I started to stutter, and I was calling for my roommate who wasn't in the same country and wouldn't even be able to help me. My mouth started to gape wide open, and I could barely scream, as the child, who had been staring at me the whole time, with a strange voice, says,
"That's not very nice of you. You wanted to hurt me."
Completely petrified, I started to try and move the blade again, but to no avail.
"Now, I'm going to hurt you."
As I finally find my voice and scream, I realize that I'm in bed. Having been so cold in the morning and shocked from the dream, I breathed a sigh of relief. I gathered my thoughts, believing it to be purely a dream that was set off by hearing all the stories so often. As I sat up, I noticed my door was still open, and I had to use the restroom again. I started my day and proceeded to get ready before I saw something that made me start to question everything that happened. The blade was in the same position I always left it in, but the sheath, it had been removed.
Number 1.
Here's a little background. The story that I'm about to tell you happened to me about 18 years ago. It actually is more of a story about my mother than me personally. My mother comes from a family of 5 siblings, and she was the youngest of them. They came from Germany and migrated into the Czech Republic, and they went willingly due to better work opportunities. As my mother was struggling at the time with the Czech language, and the gap between her and her siblings was large, she struggled in finding someone close enough to her in this desperate time. But she actually surprisingly found such a person in her oldest brother. They became best friends in the future too. I tell you this now as it has something to do with the investigation later. When my mother was about 30 and I was about 8 years old, she had received a message that my uncle, her oldest brother, he died. Obviously, she was devastated by this message. She would cry whole days and would be on the telephone trying to find out what had happened, as the police refused to tell her all the details. She would cry for whole days and was always on the phone trying to find out what had happened, as, strangely, the police refused to tell her all of the details. After about a week, the police, they came to tell us the cause of the death. He had supposedly been driving under the influence and too fast and had a deadly car accident. They also told us that these types of accidents were very common. My mum, though, she didn't believe this. My uncle was a good man and a solid businessman, and he didn't drink. Because my mother didn't believe the police, she called my uncle's wife to meet up with her. My auntie, she didn't want to talk about the accident and told us that we should just let it go. But my mother was furious. She told my auntie that she couldn't believe that my auntie didn't care and that she didn't want to know the truth. After some conversation, my mother convinced her that she wanted to see the car. My mother and father drove one day into Prague, and when they returned, they looked happy. They told me that everything was okay, but I could clearly see something was bothering them. Later, when I was 23, my father told me what they saw, but at the time, I didn't understand. My father told me that the car was burned up, and it didn't look like a car accident. In fact, it looked almost as if someone had put a bomb in the engine or something. After about a week, my mother had some arguments with my father. This was pretty surprising to me, as they never really argued. Or, at least, never in front of me. For the next few weeks, everything seemed absolutely normal, except for a few mobile phones, as my mother always tried to be secretive around them. About 3 months later, my mother had a serious argument with someone on the phone. She told my father that it was nothing serious, but he didn't believe her. They talked to each other until my mother told him that she was in contact with some private investigator. My father became furious and warned her that she was walking on thin ice, but my mother told him that he didn't have to worry anyway, as the private investigator, he refused to work on the case after some difficulties. My mother, though, she didn't want to leave this alone, and so she contacted yet another private investigator. One day, we came home with my mother from my school. She drove me home that day, and it was near the school. I normally walked home as it wasn't that far and we lived in a small town anyway. But when we came home, there were 3 black cars just sitting out the front of our house. When we came to the door and opened, we saw my father sitting on a couch with a white face. He looked at us, and he was clearly scared. There were 4 other men in black suits with black hand gloves and dark glasses. They looked at my mum and told us to come in. My mother immediately told them that she would call the police, but the men, they just laughed at her. Before we knew it, 3 more similar large men came in right behind us and pushed us into the home. Behind them, there was an old, white-haired man. I was pretty nervous, and I don't know why I did this, because I was on the verge of crying. I looked at the old man and smiled at him nervously, but he just looked at me. His glare was horrible. It was without emotion, and he looked at me as if he was thinking about something very seriously. He made me look away, but I saw his glare on me for a couple more seconds. Then he spoke in some language that I didn't know at the time, but later found out that it was Russian. He said something to one of the men, and the man, he just nodded. Then the old man started to talk in Czech with a deep old voice. It was really creepy. He told us,
Miss, I'm sure you know why we're here today. You have been warned before, and you didn't listen. Now, you will pay the consequences.
From nowhere, 2 of the men snatched my mother and duct taped her mouth. They also put some white cloth to her face for a few seconds until she fell unconscious. Then they put a black sack on her head. My father tried to protest and to do something, but one of the men hit him so hard that he also fell unconscious. Then the old man, he told me that if I stayed quiet and followed them, they would not hurt my mum. I cried and could not talk out of sheer fear, but I nodded. I was put in the car and we began to drive. I started to hear my mum after about 5 minutes, and we drove for about another 20 minutes when we suddenly stopped. From nowhere, the men around me, they just started to leave the car, and then one of the men told me to come out. I was afraid, but something in that old man's voice made me believe that maybe if I am really silent and listen to what they tell me, everything will be alright. They took my mum out of the car and took off the black sack and took away some little white piece of plastic rope or whatever it was around her hands. They let my mum hug me, and then the old man said,
Look around. What do you see? Go on, try and cry out. No one will come.
A moment of silence came over us, and my mother, she started to cry. The old man, he started to grin and said,
Your son? He's the same age as mine.
There was another pause, but this one, it felt like an eternity. And after which, he said,
Today, you get to go home. But just today. Your brother, he was not a good man. Let it go.
From out of nowhere, they just got into the car and drove away. I was left standing with my mum in the middle of nowhere, and we were crying and she was hugging me. She didn't have a phone, so we had to hitchhike to get home. We got home after about 3 hours, as we didn't know where we were. As we saw our home and one of the black cars still in front of the house, my mum started to run desperately to the house. At the tender age of 8, even I realised that she was afraid that my dad was hurt. When we came home, we saw that 3 men were sitting around, and our father, he was in the kitchen with a towel to his nose. It was bloody, but he wasn't really bleeding anywhere else. My mum started to cry and hugged him, and the men didn't protest, and immediately they started to leave the house. My mum asked my father if he was okay, and he told her that when he woke up, the men had helped him with his bloody nose. They didn't hurt him anymore, and they told him that they'd only hit him because they didn't want him to interfere. They also told him that they knew almost everything about us, and then my dad started throwing examples out, which at the time I didn't understand, but my mother, she was white and trembling. My father later told me that they knew everything, almost every single thing about us. They also told my father that the private investigator, he was left with 2 broken legs. We never heard of them again, and my mother, she immediately stopped looking into the case of her brother. We never had any more trouble with them after this, and since that time, we've never seen them ever again. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys. And I guess you could say that those Russian Mafia men, they were putting their foot down. For the politically minded, that joke will make sense. But for everyone else, well, I guess you just ain't picking up what I'm putting down. New Year's resolution, I'm going to look into better jokes for all of you guys, okay? Don't worry, I'm going to come up with something better than this, okay? I promise. Oh, gee. Anyway, thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared this story for us all here. And I honestly hope you guys are all doing really well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. Also, please do me a favor and just state in your email what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent just so that I can be above board with everything. Also, remember to tell me in the email if you would like to remain anonymous, and please change any names if you don't want particular names to be shared. As always guys, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram for updates throughout the week. You can also catch me on my second gaming channel, all of which have links in the description below. Thanks for always tuning in guys, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you mates in the next one.